Welcome, everyone, to Tech Tuesday here on Northwest Digital News. We have Kevin Hunter, Kyle Torgerson, and Harry Brelsford joining us out of the Seattle area. Thanks, everyone, for joining us on this special broadcast, and so much to cover when it pertains to tech. Harry, first of all, I want you to give our viewing audience a little background on yourself. Decades of experience around tech, one of the best known names in the world of Microsoft and Linux and many others. Share with our viewing audience a little bit about who Harry Brelsford is.
Well, I mean, very briefly, got involved early with computers. I don't want to age myself, but I will let it slip out the original Apple II Plus, and just got hooked fairly young, and got hooked, and it's grown into an entire career. Moved to Seattle about 30 years ago. For me, that was the right decision at the right time. And so, yes, got involved in particular with Microsoft Small Business Server. Fast forward the movie, 20 books later, a few hundred articles, conferences, a magazine at one point. And we built a community surrounding small, medium business technology. Kevin, that's how I would really sum it up. You can talk all day long about products and product stacks, but products come and go.
Sure.
We're really here about small and medium business technology. So that's who I am. I love carrying the flag.
All right. So last week you were at the CompTIA seminar that's actually done every single year. And share with us some of the learning experiences out of that, because there's actually a few different things that I found online that are published by many of the contributors who go to CompTIA as well. And so what were some of your takeaways from your visit there?
Well, yeah, so it was the annual CompTIA ChannelCon conference this year in Washington, D.C. Kevin, it's always interesting. It's at the last couple days of July, first couple days of August, but that's actually an open part of the calendar for technology conferences, right? Because you're starting to get into fishing season. So they occupy a really neat position. But more specific to your question, a couple of things stood out for me. So security. CompTIA is very well known for its certification program, the S Plus security designation for DoD and other security opportunities. That's always a popular theme. I would say I was impressed this year about how they continue to grow in the area of attracting both young people to the technology industry as well as career changers. So they're very good about recruiting people into technology. And Kevin, we need that. You know, there's a lot of job openings and shortages and not enough people to do the work. Now, the work is hard. That's why the job openings exist. But CompTIA does an amazing job of that. Maybe one last thing that stood out this year, a shout out to the Women in Technology lectures and luncheon that they had. Kevin, quite frankly, when you look at these technology trade shows, you look at the hardcore part of our industry, it's often 80, 90% male. Okay. And and the programmers and DevOps and engineering and all that. And so CompTIA has done a really good job of recruiting younger people, career changers, women to the industry. Those are a few things that stood out. You know, could probably go on and on and on about, blockchain and Internet of Things and all that. It was all there. But those are the maybe 3 or 4 highlights that I recall.
You mentioned about security, and I want to share with you something from a recent Forrester security study found that 82% of organizations today, businesses today, struggle to identify and secure network-connected devices. Worse, most were unclear on who is responsible for managing those devices, and their study said that 54% of all of those they surveyed have a lot of anxiety due to security with network-connected devices. Your thoughts on that?
Well, I'll tell you what. I'll tell you my own story, and maybe we can dig a little deeper into it today. But I recently, in the last 10 days, have moved my office in the Seattle area. So I'm coming to you from my new office, and moves are amazing. I just posted up on Facebook this morning that I lose things that I had and I find things that I lost. I mean, you can always count on a move to go through all the mini storage and find things and lose things. So Kevin, my point is this: is that I found one of my Wi-Fi connection points was open. Okay. And here I am, the author who's written books about networks and servers and so on. And I came to discover one of my Cisco Wi-Fi hotspots, one of the stations was in an open condition. And that dovetails very much so to the statistics you just rated, right? That we're either unaware, we're scared, afraid. But that exists in every business, right? There's that gap, and you don't discover that until there's a triggering event, right? And then it's like, oh my God, that's been open the whole time, or we use the word password for password.
Yeah. Yes. You know what? On a completely different level, I was actually taking a look at a home for a friend of mine who's in the process of finishing up a house for sale. And she lets me know, she says, Kevin, there's a lockbox out front, and here's the 4-digit number. And I just cracked up when she gave it to me, because I was like, that's the 4-digit number, like on half of the lockboxes I've been to. Oh, and for people that are wondering, don't use 1955.
Yeah.
I have no idea why people like that number, but don't use 1955 for your lockboxes. A really high percentage of them have that number in the lockbox. So,
well, I need to change some things.
He's sitting here going, wait a minute, is that the code for your drugstore?
Nope. Son, boy, that sounds like college kids would love to know that number and have a party. As they say.
Think I hit a home run here with something Kyle has under security with 1955. He's getting a smirk on his face over here because, yeah, it's one of the most popular numbers. I don't recommend using it. Just like don't use password for your password.
Right. Exactly. Man. Cool.
Interesting stuff. So, another question I have, and this actually came out of CompTIA, and do you remember a gentleman by the name of Todd Thibodeau? And I don't know if I'm saying that correctly or not, but do you know Todd?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, he's from Bend, Oregon, and longtime CEO of CompTIA, has just celebrated his 10th anniversary running the organization. Yep.
Okay, so he made a comment. This has actually to do with in-house IT guys. So there's some organizations that are using, obviously, a consulting service to take care of their IT. Many are using also an in-house IT guy. And he was commenting on the fact of how many companies actually rely on that employee to go get their own training and on their own time. And he made a comment on how risky that was, number one. But he said, with all the different demands these employees have on their own time, to think that they're going to go get the training they need and stay up to date on everything and do it on their own time is actually not very good management. And he goes, and probably in those cases, the organizations aren't properly understanding their level of risk. So I'm curious what your thoughts on that are, and what recommendations do you have for organizations who have their own IT people?
Well, before I get to that, I'll try to land a joke about that. It reminds me of me in my younger career. I'd love to tell you that I had 6-pack abs and I could hang out on a California beach and I was fit and all that. And then I became an IT guy and I had to go do that training. Okay, so I'm getting to the punchline, but I had to do that training at night. I had to do that training on the weekends. Of course, that impacts your physical fitness. And it's a legitimate issue, by the way. The IT pros are not the most fit people. But back to your point specifically, that's part of the problem with having the IT pro have to go get training on their own after hours at night, because it is cutting into their personal life. Why don't we leave it at that? It's cutting into their personal life. It's cutting into what they're recharging to come do good work for you. And then it also has the effect, and I've seen it 100 times, it has the effect of devaluing the loyalty to the existing employer, right? Because it's like, well, hey, I just picked up SQL Server, or some people call it SQL Server, but the monster, the mamma jamma database. And once you pick up that skill, Kevin and Kyle, today that's known as big data. Right? What used to be SQL Server, and you were a SQL administrator, and you made an okay living. You might You might work for a local airline, and it was down by SeaTac Airport. It was a good job. Boy, you flip that around and you call yourself big data, you call yourself analytics, and they're increasingly pivoting that conversation as we speak to machine learning and now AI. I don't know if I don't know if I agree that SQL Server is AI. That's a little bit of a stretch. But gentlemen, you get the point that the risk is that your employee has reinvented themselves. They become more valuable. Can't blame them. Can't blame them for leaving that local airline and going to maybe a better opportunity in a startup or one or two well-known Seattle tech companies.
Yeah, exactly. Hey, I have a question for you with regard to people picking up the necessary skills in the tech field. And the reason why I mention this is we've recognized this in a lot of different areas as well. So let's just take the construction business for just a moment, like all the different things from electrical to plumbing, heating, cooling, the framers, pavers, all these people doing the work in that industry. They're finding a major shortage of the proper kinds of talent in those areas. And in part because we went away from the tech school models. Not that we've departed from that, but I'm just saying, and all the different ways in which people could pick up trades even before leaving high school. And the reason why all that's important is I think to some extent, a certain part of that overflowed into the IT and the tech areas as well. And so we're seeing fewer and fewer people of that younger generation, even though they should be conceivably very tech savvy. I saw posting, this was actually for third quarter 2017, there were 604,000 IT jobs available. And the number one complaint across the country was not enough workers with the proper skills to fill those jobs. And they're great paying fields. How do people get into those areas?
Proper skills. That's the key point. So let's first digest the number that you quoted, and then we'll try and figure out the secret sauce on how to break into that, and into that world. So, you see this all the time, that there's 500,000 unfilled jobs, and in the next 10 years, there's going to be 6 million unfilled jobs. Couple of problems with that number, that it's a mismatch of skill sets, right? So there are people, right? We're not 6 million people short, but a lot of people, present company accepted, we came up through the network infrastructure world, times is called break fix. Things broke and you had to fix them. Things don't break anymore. And if they do, a laptop is, a sufficient laptop's under $1,000, you probably buy a new laptop. So the nature of the work has changed. And so when you see these unfilled positions, Kevin and Kyle, typically what it is it's hard work, right? So again, going back to analytics, going back to DevOps, which would be formerly known as programming, this is hard work, and that's why those positions are unfilled. Now, that said, but before I get to the secret sauce and opportunities, let's add on another area that I think has sadly gone away, is software testing. So now they use artificial intelligence, machine learning, and other tools to do a lot of the software testing, because you may remember ads on the radio in yesteryear where there were vocational colleges that had software testing certificates, right?
Exactly.
And so it's changed, right? And here again, we would have had that talk back then about all the job openings in software testing. So the secret sauce for the high-paying opportunities is, let me give you an example of something I read. It's probably about 18 months ago, but it's very true. I believe it's in the Wall Street Journal or CNBC or something, that you had professors leaving the university. Let's assume a hotshot professor makes $100,000 at the University of Washington. It's not a bad life; it's a good life. But when Amazon is saying, "Hey, your specialty is artificial intelligence, AI," and you got to remember, 18 months ago, we were just learning how to pronounce the word AI. Right now, it's a little more mainstream. it changes very quickly. But I read where these guys are getting offers for $300,000 and $400,000 because of the labor shortage. And so let's translate that back to the listener of the show who could realistically pursue an opportunity. AI is a different animal, and I'm not that smart. But Kevin, coming full circle, we're talking security. Okay, we're talking security. And that's something you can do at a relatively low level. And I mean that kindly, an entry level position. We all start, we work our way up. It's something I think you can get really excited about, right? That day doesn't end at 5 p.m. If you don't want it to, but I mean, that's something you can really get your head into and again, make yourself a better person with training outside of your job and so on. So, I think I'm going to roll with security as one of the best examples that's realistic for the rest of us. I'll tie it off by just saying, again, when you hear of developer operations or DevOps or programming, those guys, those are heavy math. I mean, I only play a math professor on TV, okay?
Right. So I have a question for you. With the average cost of tuition in the various colleges and universities being what it is, the reason why I'm only mentioning that is because some people might think that the suggestion I'm about to make would be an expensive option for them. But here's where I'm going with this. What do you think about, because here's one of the complaints that I hear from business people with regard to those that, let's say they go to a 2-year college and they get some kind of computer related training.
Yeah.
I'm hearing from the businesses in the field or people who are doing consulting services that those students are coming to them no better equipped to do the job than if they had just showed up one day and kind of learned under somebody's wing. And I was like, wow, really?
Yeah.
So my point had been, well, maybe, and I'm curious what your thought is on this, maybe the student should have, instead of spending money on tuition, maybe the student might have thought about contacting a tech or networking company and saying, hey, can I come out and job shadow somebody, offering to do so for free, and to a period of time in which you can acquire the learning and the education to where you can become an asset for that organization. But let's just say it went on for 6 months, which is unlikely to, but let's say you did a job shadow for 6 months. You're not paying anybody for the education you're getting, and you're getting a completely industry specific and applicable skill set that you can use in that employer or another similar employer that makes you a very employable candidate. I'm curious what your thought is on that.
Well, yeah, I mean, I actually, in an unusual way, went down that road because I believe in that. So again, I guess I'm a storyteller to make my point, but this is a true story. And so what I did with my youngest son, who is, going to start his second year in college, and I was thinking, what can we do 2 summers ago? So out of high school, 2 summers ago, before college, he ended up working in food service. That's fine. Wash dishes, that's fine. But prior to that spring, I captured the domain name willworkforstockoptions.com. That's still out there. So,
yeah.
The listeners are welcome to click over to that. And I'm assuming it's still up by the domain's still out there. And what we did is we created a form. Okay, it wasn't a real web page, but it was a form that people could fill out. And my son, I did a little photography with him where he had a little sign about will work for stock options, kind of playing on, that kind of theme that he wanted a job. And Kevin, the point is, we did talk to a couple of companies. They had some governance issues that they couldn't respond to fast enough, in a few weeks for that particular summer job. But if I reached over off camera and got my notebook of great unused ideas, that's a page in the notebook of unused ideas that I want your listeners to run with. And not only shadow or work for free, but I think you might go in there and say, hey, you're a startup, you're pre-IPO, you're not a public company. Can I work for stock options as my internship, right? So it's not a hit on cash. There's an exchange of value. And Kevin and Kyle, you never know. You never know. It only takes one startup, right? You just never know if that would make sense. Now, again, our experience, we talked to 4 companies. We couldn't get it across the finish line for them in time. And now my son's interests have changed slightly. But don't get too hung up on the will work for stock options. That's not really the point, because they may have private equity investors, they may be venture capital backed, and they may not be able to do it. Right? Does that make sense? That
Yep.
great idea, Harry, can't do it. We could pay you $12 an hour, and you'll go sure. Or to your point, maybe you could work for free. Companies are a little. I think there's some labor stuff. You can work for free, but I think there has to be like an exchange of value. Like, Kevin, you ever hear these CEOs that work for $1 for the year, right?
Yep.
You could be that guy. You could be I'll work for $1 for the summer.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And I have some, there have been a few case histories of people that I've recommended that to. In fact, there was a college graduate that I interviewed on my broadcast back in Minneapolis, St. Paul, a number of years ago. And he had just come out of college with a marketing degree, and he had pinpointed an organization that he decided was his dream job, and he didn't know how to get into there. And he had, contacted him many different ways, hoping to get interviewed for a job. And, he had explained to me that they weren't hiring. So he says, how could I potentially get in this organization? It's like, propose a job shadow. And what's interesting is all of his interaction with the organization had been, we're not hiring, we're not hiring, we're not hiring. He goes in and does a job shadow for a day, and they liked him so much they said, hey, come back tomorrow and try it again. This went on for a week, and that following Monday he had a job offer sitting on his table when he got back to work.
Well, and you know what? I'm gonna get a blank page over here, if you don't mind, and I'm gonna write job shadow, and I'm gonna put it in the unused ideas notebook over here, because I like that term. I've never heard that terminology. I like it better than internship. And the problem with internship, and there's that funny movie about the older guys that are interns at Google, right? The middle-aged guys that it's a comedy. There's that. But more importantly, I run a company, and we've tried interns, and we've had mixed success. And so I just say that because the word intern or internship can bring up different memories, right?
Correct.
So job shadows are better. Personally, I like job shadow better.
Well, so for what it's worth, you mentioned the willworkforstockoptions.com. By the way, Kyle, did you look? I believe that website is actually still up. Correct? Yeah, it is. It is still up.
Yeah, hopefully that's my son.
Yeah. So the point for our viewers is that's one idea. Internship's another idea. Job shadowing is another idea. The point is be a little creative. You don't have to tell anybody, well, I tried your idea and it didn't work. The whole point of this discussion is get creative. You might need 5 or 6 ideas to discover your path, but so be it. Kyle, by the way, has a question from one of the viewers off of Twitch TV. So go ahead and share it.
Yeah. Okay. Just our viewers who are watching, you can always post comments and ask questions, and we'll be happy to answer. Now, R.R. Neal said, where do you see the most growth for those coming into the IT career field?
Well, again, the most realistic growth, the most stable growth is going to be security. And in particular, I would start with the defense industry, right? And so now I'm a little biased that way because I'm in Seattle. We have Boeing. We have some major defense facilities. So you would expect me to kind of have that perspective. But that's a great place to start. Now, then let's talk about where to go, right? So where's the opportunity for today is security. Where to go once you get that base is to I'm a startup guy, right? So once you get that experience, let's say 5-10 years experience, you live within your means, okay, because you're going to make a little money. So live within your means. Maybe don't have a brand new car every year, but if you have the flexibility, and it's everything relates to everything, but if you have the flexibility to go to a security related firm, a security related startup. Now we're kicking in stock options. We've come full circle, right? And that's how you make real money, right? So you're going to make a salary, but you're going to have a kicker. And that's what I would offer for today. What I struggle with, another way to answer the question is, what do I struggle with? And the low level traditional service provider role, assisting my favorite small and medium businesses, that industry has just changed, guys. So much of that work is done remotely. The laptops just don't die. The monitors just don't die. If they die, people order off Amazon. I'm just being completely truthful. It's hard to make a living like we did in the 80s and 90s, and that's not surprising. Of course, times change. Mm-hmm. But Kyle, I hope that helps. I'm gonna stick to the knitting on security today.
No, that's perfect. And to your point with regard to hardware, I remember as well, Harry, because I was actually in a different capacity within a large organization, but I was working for Guardian Industries, and one of the long timers in network support left the organization, and they struggled to find somebody with the proper qualifications to come in and fill this role. And I just blurted out one day that, hey, I could do that along with, I was a quality director for the organization. I was like, I could do that along with my quality director's role, and ended up doing hardware setups, hardware upgrades, software upgrades, setting up networks, all that kind of good stuff. I was doing a lot of that. And to your point, wow, was there a lot of changes with hardware. We were upgrading hardware and computers pretty much every single year, sometimes with times within a year.
And you had to flip the little dip switches.
Yes.
Yes. You were down at the hardware level. Hey, Kevin, if you don't mind, before we get too far from a thought that you had a few minutes ago about education and technology and being equipped, I had a really interesting conversation within the last year with a thought leader. Her name is Grace Schroeder out of New York City. She runs a startup in the DevOps area. If you're interested, it's slinger.io, and that's SLINGR. So Slinger without the E, slinger.io. And she's been heavily involved in a couple of different technology platforms called, Slack is one of them, a popular comms-based platform. Watson from IBM, and now she's really involved in blockchain. And we were talking about what, it's a little bit like talking to George Foreman, on those hamburger commercials. George, or those invention commercials. Remember, he does the invention service. George, right. I have a great idea. What should I do? And it kind of started out that way. Grace, what should a young person do today? And she recruits, talent, right? That has to be really current with things like Watson and blockchain. And she said, who's doing a really good job is, to your earlier point, Kevin, it's not so much the 2-year program or the 4-year program. Now, those are a different vibe, and there's reasons to go to college. Don't get me wrong. And maybe you go to college and then you come back to some of these private programs, these 6-month programs like Galvanize, that are real intensive. And so I am in no way suggesting you drop out of college or not go to college. Hopefully you've gone to college and you know how to write, you know how to communicate, you're headed into management one fine day. But Galvanize is brass tacks, right? And she was really impressed. And I don't mean to call them out because there's 4 or 5 of those type of schools, right? So find the school of your choice. But that's what she told me. That's where she's impressed. And in 6 months, if you can handle the pace, you come out, let's just say keystroke proficient. That's what she needs. She needs keystroke proficient talent.
Well, Harry, the content that we've shared here today, anybody who has interest in this field and getting into this field, this has been pure gold for those people, because it's, one of the things that I've noticed that our audiences really lack today, and this comes from having served on advisory boards in various universities and counseling students that are in, graduating and heading out into business. But there's this little lack of creative thinking. I've just been kind of surprised that people think along a single line and go, wow, I ran into a hurdle or an obstacle and therefore I'm stuck. And I'm like, well, no, there's like many, many paths to this. So we've helped illustrate a few of the paths, and that's of huge value to people. Kyle has another piece here off of Twitch TV. Go ahead and share that, Kyle.
What changes would you recommend the smaller consulting firms make to keep up with the changes in the industry, especially if they offer remote and on-site services?
And can you repeat the first part? I kind of got the question. Please repeat.
What changes would you recommend the smaller consulting firms make to keep up with the changes in the industry?
Yeah, again, to me, the simple answer is look for sectors that have money. Okay. And that's a very simplistic answer, but I want you to think about that for a second, that once again, the defense sector, if you live in a community that has aerospace that's defense related, what have you, all of those industries, I'm not suggesting you need to join the Army or the Navy or the Marines or what have you, but there's, as you probably are well aware, but there's an entire industry beneath, right, those areas, right, of vendors.
Correct.
So I would look for sectors that have money. And, right now, as we speak, and Kevin, back to your point, the construction sector is strong. It's still strong. There are some, most recently in the past couple of weeks, there are some communications, some analysis that home buildings coming back into balance. That's not all bad. We've had a housing shortage, right? It's been hysterical. I'm reading that it's coming into balance. I'm not reading that we're headed into a housing dip, but the housing sector is healthy. So I would look towards those kind of things versus, I'll give you an example that I think maybe is not as interesting based on demographics. And it would be my wife's dad was a pediatric dentist, and he rode that hard through the 60s and 70s, right? We all went to the dentist. We got a problem with that form of dentistry now. First of all, the prevention has gotten so good, right, that kids don't have cavities like they did in my day. Just the prevention's better. And then second, we have a demographic issue, right, that we don't have the baby boom bubble coming through the system. So Kyle, that's again at a high level. Just look at the sectors that have cash, and then pivot towards those. And unfortunately, avoid sectors. Oh boy, breaks my heart. I grew up in Alaska, but the fishing sector up in Alaska is just not what it was, back in the 80s. It's a heartbreaker. There's a reality, right? Boy, I'd love to serve, the fishing industry. That's okay, but that's, boy, you're paddling upstream. Does that make sense? That you really need to look for sectors that are expanding. Just being brutally honest, but boy, security and defense seem to have the hot hand right now under the, just the way money's being spent. I'll leave it at that.
No, that completely makes sense, and that's on when I think about the sales and marketing sides of things and where you're targeting your services to, vitally important that organizations understand that. I'm going to take this is actually somewhat along the same lines here, but there's a question here that I wanted to pose to you, Harry. This has to do with there's so many organizations out there that have stated that they don't believe that they're completely up to speed on all the digital transformations that have taken place with regard to technology, and many companies feeling like they're losing ground to competitors because they're not completely up to snuff. The problem is that this is the field of technology is like a ocean of sharks, and there's other good fish, of course, in the water. But you jump into that water and you're risking running into a shark. How do these companies, where would you recommend if they feel that they're behind the curve as it relates to technology? Where do you recommend they go to look, and how do they avoid running into a shark as it pertains to technology?
Well, and is a shark, so let me just clarify one thing. Is a shark a better equipped, more efficient competitor? So the company A is concerned that company B, C, and D, its competitors, are sharks because they're more technology savvy, or is a shark maybe a unsavory service provider who would take advantage of company A?
The latter, an unsavory provider. And here's the problem,
Okay.
is that when somebody runs into that unsavory provider that's just preying on either their fears as it pertains to their technology or their security, etc., and throwing all these little things out there, these colorful things that people want to chase. The problem is that you don't know if you've made a mistake until 6 months, a year, sometimes 2 years down the road. There's a fair amount of time before you know that you're with the wrong organization. You made the bad decision. So how do you make sure? What things would you recommend that they do in their due diligence to make sure they aren't with a shark service provider?
Yeah, it's that's always a tough one. I guess a couple of things. Here's what I've observed since 2008 in the Great Recession and how things have changed is that, SMB Nation, at the end of the day, SMB Nation's a technology company, and we serve a couple of different audiences. And one of the audiences was, in fact, the independent software vendors, the original equipment manufacturers, OEMs, some common names we all know, right? Intel. Intel's a one to throw out.
Mm-hmm.
And before the Great Recession, they would, again, just my own experience, but they would throw a six-figure purchase order to SMB Nation and say, go do this. Okay. And an example would be, we did a 30-country tour on behalf of Intel and Microsoft. A lot of fun. And so go do that. And they would just throw money at you. Now you had to manage it and deliver and all that. But here's my answer, is that today, as we sit in 2018, the six-figure purchase orders are gone. Okay. At least in my world.
Mm-hmm.
And so everything's a pilot. So you're going to have a pilot program that's a fraction of the cost, and they're going to test it and they're going to see if they get legs. And I'm always up for a challenge, right? I'm like, oh, bring it. Sure. We don't lack confidence in SMB Nation. So we'll take your pilot. We're going to prove our worth and prove that we can deliver as we promised. And so at some level, we're a service provider. And so that would be number one, is always think in terms of a pilot program. And I'll tell you, gentlemen, whenever I forget that and I get excited about 10 years ago and I'm thinking, man, I'd sure like a new car, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'd love to go get a new car. I'm gonna get one of them big POs again. And the joke in a harbor town like where I'm at in Puget Sound is there's always a boat in the harbor called First Draw. Right? They took that first draw and went and bought a boat. That's gone. And every time I go there, I lose, right? I just, wow, what was I thinking? What was I thinking about coming out with a big project when everybody wants a low cost pilot that's measurable. Okay. Mm-hmm. And so I'm recommending that. Number two, I'm recommending meetup.com. So meetup.com is sort of the new user group community. Back in the day, we had user groups for IBM and Novell NetWare. And I mean, they were huge, and 300 people on a Thursday night with pizzas. That generation, that changed. And now it's much more organic. If you go to meetup.com and search on the topic of your choice. And so one would be Azure. From Microsoft, the cloud solution, or Amazon Web Services, AWS. I'll bet you dollars to donuts in any middle-sized community or, within an SMSA, you might have to drive, maybe you're in the outer ring of Atlanta, as they say, might have to drive down to Atlanta to go to the Thursday night meeting. But I can assure you those meetups exist on Azure, AWS, blockchain, security. And Kyle, I really think that's how you learn, but that's a filter. That's a filter to kind of weed out the sharks, because a service provider that is committing to a Thursday night meetup or Tuesday night or whatever is already a little bit higher on the food chain, right? They're already a thinking person. They've made a commitment, probably drove 60, 90 minutes to get there. So those are the kind of filters I recommend. There's still, I don't know, I'm a married man, so the joke isn't going to land, but I guess I would say I'm not into online dating. Okay.
Yeah.
that stuff's kind of scary.
Exactly.
Now,
go ahead.
Oh, okay. So, have you heard of a program called Teals?
I'm drawing a blank on a Tech Tuesday. I'm thinking of a duck that I thought there was a duck breed called teal, but go ahead.
Now, Teals, I graduated in 2017 from high school, and my high school actually decided to start a new program. It's called Teals. They didn't start it, but they adopted it and accepted it. And I believe it's Microsoft run, and they get coding into the high schools.
Yeah.
So there's the AP version, which they teach Java, and then there's the regular version where they teach Snap. My year they only had the regular version, and then the year after I graduated, they had the Java version, which kind of made me sad. I missed it. But the cool part is that Teals is growing and growing pretty fast. And I just wanted to get your thoughts on it, but also to all our viewers that are like, wow, I wish I had that stuff. If you go on to, actually, I'll post the link right now.
Okay.
If you go on to the link that I'm posting right now, you can actually find I want Teals at my school, and you can actually get that in your school. So if you want your school to get that program or want to start thinking about technology and want your, community to be more into tech, this is a pretty great program.
So the link that he's looking at here, too, that we have on the screen up on our end is tealsk12.org. Yep. So Teals with k12.org.
And every year they, I think...
Go ahead and flash it up on the back screen, if you would, for our viewers to take a quick look at.
Every single year, I believe it's every year, but they actually go to the campus in, I believe, Redmond, and it's like a little expo for video game development and things like that. And
now it rings a bell. Yeah, this rings a bell. Yep.
Okay, bring us back to the screen.
Yeah, so I just wanted your thoughts on that.
Well, Kyle, a couple of questions for you would be, is this related to two terms, STEM or STEAM? So STEM, what? Science, technology, engineering, math. STEAM, science, technology, engineering, arts, and math. Because I think we overlook arts, guys, because it's still about UI. It's still about usability, right?
Mm-hmm.
You need what am I trying to say? Left hemisphere. You need that other hemisphere too, right?
Right.
But is this sounds like this is similar to STEAM and STEM and that kind of thing. Maybe this is more like code.org. What is it? Hour of Code that they do in December was does that ring a bell? That code.org is, I think Gates and some others put some money behind this, that we're going to come into schools, volunteers are going to come in and do 1 hour of code one fine day in December. And, as a former president said, there's there's that one light out of 1,000 candles. There's that one light. I'm not quite getting the analogy right, but that's all they're trying to do, Kyle, is just find that one light bulb that lights up out of 1,000 people. Yours sounds like a more intensive program. Was it a curriculum?
Yeah, it was actually a full-blown class.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's cool. And, I guess I would also add, when you start talking about the different languages, and it really is analogous to learning a foreign language. And, I know just enough to order at a Spanish restaurant, right? A Mexican restaurant. I'm just enough to be dangerous. But I really do want to learn Spanish. Of all languages, I want to learn Spanish. But it's analogous, right? That Java, it is a foreign language, right? And if I'll give you a better example. People who are musicians are typically really good programmers, right? They just have a different mindset. But but the point I wanted to make is when you start talking Java and all that, it's not for everybody. Even if you got in that curriculum, if you got in the teal curriculum and you say, hey, I don't want to do this all day with my life. This isn't, I'm just not wired this way. That's okay, because maybe you're a startup guy, a startup gal, right? And you could really understand what's going on here and think in terms of working with investors, angel investors, to fund these startups. And I can tell you, the investment community, they would appreciate if you went through that curriculum and you, at that point, you're almost a translator, right? You're saying, hey, this is a really good idea. I think we should fund it, even though I can't program in Java.
Now, I do have another question on Twitch. Now, this is from R. Neil as well. Thank you, R. Neil. Is there certain CompTIA training you would say is a must-have for those who seek to get more into the security sector and work with the programming?
Yeah. CompTIA, gentlemen, if you don't mind, let me bring up all their certifications. I know a couple that I can speak to intimately. So on my screen, I'm going to bring that up. So again, not surprisingly, number one is security. Number two, I really like Project Plus. So that's project management, and that's a designation. Number 3 and 4, and I'm going to say a distant 3 and 4 would be the A plus and Network plus. And one of the, I'm not bringing it up, but folks, CompTIA.org, Kyle, maybe you can pop that up on the screen. You can see the different offerings from CompTIA. So to repeat, number 1, security. Number 2, and 3 and 4 would follow from that. But the idea being that, pick one, Project Plus, followed by A plus and Networking plus. But pick one and write it. They do a fantastic job. It's a credential on your LinkedIn profile and so on. I will take a moment on my own time to kind of revisit the entire roster that CompTIA offers, because they're always offering, and this is what I like about them as a trade association, they're fighting the tendency of trade associations to kind of become stuck, for lack of a better word. Trade associations tend to be conservative by nature. They sometimes just kind of stay where they're at. But CompTIA is constantly introducing new certifications that range from getting your security clearance in a DoD position down to your first job, right? And so that's kind of how I would line it up. And, the cool thing about Project Plus is it translates across industries. Kevin, earlier in the show, we talked about construction and the shortage of construction workers. Part of that would be project management, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
The cool thing is it translates directly to technology. You could be on an office building last week and at Amazon.com this week. It's the same motion.
All right, Harry, we're going to run into a hard stop soon here on our end. And so before that happens, if you would, please share your contact information for anybody who has follow-up questions for you out of this show.
Yeah. So
and Kyle, go ahead and put it in the link.
Yeah. So Harry Brelsford, all one word, Harry Brelsford at gmail.com.
Okay.
And yeah, I'm a active member of the community, so I pride myself on having dialogue. Maybe I'll end on this because I know we're time constrained, but let me give you an example. Just over the last 2 days, one of my readers emailed me about using Microsoft OneDrive, a storage facility with Dropbox and other third-party things. I connected them with the product team at Microsoft in that area, and they have a dialogue. And that's part of my role, gentlemen, is to be a connector. Not saying I have the answers, but I've got a Rolodex.
Perfect. Well, for everybody in our viewing audience, Tech Tuesday is a show you can expect to see here on this broadcast each week on Tuesdays. Yep. And so regardless of what social media platform you're following,